Well, before I begin, let me just say Sally didn't make a mistake by not reading that second passage in its full entirety from Acts. I'll refer to it later today, and I'm grateful to you, Kim, for summarizing it so well for the kids. But I thought we'd skip it today because I didn't want poor Sally to have to stand up here in the pulpit and read about the condemnation of Simon the magician immediately after Jen invited you all to hear our Pastor Emeritus do magic on this Tuesday at Serendippers. But if you want to look it up in your pew Bibles, it's on page 954. It's about the Acts of the Apostles in the early church and how the Samaritans did come to receive the Holy Spirit, even Simon, who was baptized. And that's why I think it has something to say about how we might go about doing God's business in the church today. The gospel text, though, that we just heard read, I think is familiar to most of us. Luke's story about John baptizing his slightly younger cousin, Jesus. But because it's so familiar and the characters are so familiar, I thought we might miss what is, to me, the almost comical contrast between John and Jesus. They are very different in their styles of ministry. And this is a contrast that John is humble enough to point out. He says, I baptize you with water, but Jesus, the great one who will come after me, Jesus will baptize you with Holy Spirit and fire. This fire thing we sense is very exciting to John, who is known to be a very fiery preacher himself. He sounds like he can't wait for Jesus to come into his power, to get down to doing God's business, the business of fighting evil, once and for all, wiping evil off the face of the earth. John's superhero Messiah sounds more like he belongs as the star of Die Hard or Dirty Harry than some kid's Sunday school lesson. His winnowing fork is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and gather the wheat into the granary, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. That is such great stuff. It'd be a great theme, I think, for Vacation Bible School, don't you? Jesus shoving sinners into hell with a great pitchfork. But then, when Jesus does come, it's actually not very spectacular. Luke says, when all the people were baptized, Jesus also had been baptized and was praying. Sounds like he kind of quietly waited in line for his turn, got baptized, and went off alone to sit for a while. But then comes John's long-awaited moment. The heaven was opened, the heavens were opened, and the Holy Spirit descended upon him in bodily form. Oh, this is going to be good, you know? Like, what is that thing that comes on Judgment Day? It flies and breathes fire. Let me look it up. It's a dove. Now that can't be right. John has to be thinking. What is this, a killer pigeon? But there is this voice thing coming. A voice came from heaven. A voice came from heaven to say, you are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. So the Spirit comes down upon Jesus in bodily form to save the world on the wings of a snow-white dove. That's not going to be good for business. It reminds me of that story when, when Benjamin Franklin thought the wild turkey should be the national bird. And somebody said, just a minute, Ben, good idea. But may I just suggest perhaps the eagle? Or at least some bird that can get off the ground? We in the church have thought for a long time that we know God's business better than God himself. You know, like when we thought we knew God's business, when the Crusaders and the conquistadors carried those huge banners and crosses and rode herd on all the non-Christians on the planet, forced conversions at the edge of a sword. If they'd bothered to reread these verses in the Bible, they might have been reminded that the bird of the Holy Spirit is not the golden eagle of Caesar's Rome, but the dove of peace. And this is God's business. This is what we in the church are all about. This is what our budget is for. Spreading the good news of God's unconditional love and truly amazing grace. This is difficult to understand, I think, in the stress of the world we live in, where might makes right, where rat eats rat in our daily life together. In these tough economic times, it can be discouraging even in church. The daily costs that rise each year, it seems, for doing ministry, the insurance bills, the salaries, the heating oil, the building repairs. These are some of the heftiest line items in our budget, and yet they sit there more like turkeys or pigeons than soaring and inspiring eagles of ministry. Yesterday, I thought we had a good example in this very room when we were trying to have our church leadership retreat, and the furnace was out here in Brooks Hall and in the meeting house, and we had no heat until dear Dave Gorel and a few handy servicemen came on the scene to get things up and running again. And they probably weren't thinking about it like this, that they were doing ministry, but they were helping our church spread the good news of God's love just as much as any preacher, as much as our guest speaker, Patsy Bjorling, our retreat leader, was doing. See, what Jesus would say, what the gospel, I think, makes clear everywhere, is that we in the church don't recognize ministry the way people out in the world might do. We don't evaluate a leader's success by crowd appeal and razzle